All right. Thank you so much. I'm here with Steve Volk, an author and a journalist. You write for Philadelphia Magazine. However, we're here to talk about a book. I guess it's a book that is a Kindle download that people can go to Amazon and get called Obsessed, The Compulsions and Creations of Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz. So it sounds like a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun. It's considered an e-single, so it's shorter than a book, but much longer than your average magazine article. I did it with Discover Magazine, and it was originally assigned as a 4,000-word story. Mm-hmm. And when I sat down to write, I basically couldn't stop. And Jeff Schwartz's story I thought was fascinating enough that I just had to get it all down. And then I really did the most unprofessional thing I think I've ever done as a writer. I didn't warn the editor. I didn't tell her it was coming in literally 3.5 times the length she asked for. I just hit send. And she ends up liking the story, and so here we are.
Awesome. Well, that's cool. And this is an interesting story because this guy's very controversial. He's a very unique character. And I guess people, maybe what would people know him for?
Well, they know him mostly for his work with OCD, obsessive-compulsive disorder. He was on Oprah Winfrey's show. He had a best-selling book of his own years ago where he touted his therapy. But basically, he showed how you could use mindfulness training and mindfulness meditation to turn around your OCD and to start living a normal life, with an illness that for a lot of people would deprive them of hours and hours a day and basically render them even non-functional.
Mm-hmm. Now, he's controversial in that he has some different points of view, and maybe could you share, that part of him?
Well, it's interesting. To me, Obsessed, one of the interesting parts about it is that, for people who are sort of interested in that whole idea of what's it like to challenge a scientific paradigm, material speaks to that, like what you go through when you are running counter to what the mainstream of science is saying. So whereas science seems to be telling us that we are our brains and our whole selves, our identities, our choices are all dictated by physical processes in the brain, and a lot of people take this out to mean that we don't have any free will. Schwartz says his therapy, which involves just shifting your attention in particular ways in regard to your illness, he says that it shows that we do have free will and that we are not our brain. And in fact, one of his books is called "You Are Not Your Brain," and that is an idea that is anathema within mainstream science. And so I really enjoyed being able to tell the story about this guy operating out on the sort of the fringes of things.
His methods in dealing with OCD have been successful, and maybe you can describe kind of what those are.
Yeah, his methods have been very successful. There are people even trying to apply them now to conditions like Tourette's. And there's, let's just say, good initial success trying to apply mindfulness in other ways. But basically what it involves is, just like mindfulness meditation, the whole idea is that you are able to step back and view your own thoughts dispassionately. Schwartz enabled his patients to look at the compulsions that are appearing in their own brains, telling them, your hands are dirty, you've got to wash your hands, even though they know their hands are clean. He's telling them to go with that thought that your hands are clean, to shift their attention to that, right? To shift their attention away from the compulsive thought and toward a healthier behavior. And ultimately, this sort of harkens back to why it was for some people, it was so hard to swallow. His patients were taught to say, it's not me, it's my OCD, right? So really kind of separating themselves from the functioning of their brain, or in this instance, the malfunctioning of their brain, and deriving their sense of self, sort of from other impulses. And it's been usually successful. Mm-hmm. I talk to people, they're in the story, but I talk to people who literally went from losing, say, 2, 3, 4, or 5 hours of their day to pursuing their compulsions, to washing their hands over and over, or to driving around the block countless times, or one woman who would question her boyfriend incessantly about his day, to living normal lives. The OCD thoughts still come up, but they're able to quickly recognize them for what they are, shift their attention to something else that they'd rather be doing, and and get the benefit of that.
Mm-hmm. See, that's really interesting, and it's particularly interesting to me because when I found meditation and Buddhist philosophy, I went through this whole process myself, but more, for more mundane things, getting frustrated about things at work or whatever. But it's been extremely helpful for me, and there is some science behind it with what is it called, neuroplasticity, where we can rewire it, and it like changes the brain. It actually changes rewiring in your brain how you think, right?
Schwartz calls this self-directed neuroplasticity, and he's shown that it works through fMRI images. If you look at the circuits that are normally involved in OCD thoughts and behavior, those circuits weaken over the course of time with his training. And of course, the other circuits that you're strengthening, like let's say some people would rather, rather than giving to their compulsion, they would rather carry out sort of their art or, go garden or take a walk. Well, the connections involved with those sorts of things strengthen. And so we do have this ability merely through where we focus our attention to start to change, the shape and configuration of our brains. Mm-hmm. And, I've had a very similar experience with meditation myself. It's what attracted me to Schwartz as a character. I took it on as a way to just sort of deal with life, right? And to help with the daily stresses of life. And, it's been hugely helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I maybe your experiences have been similar, but for me, for example, getting frustrated in a meeting at work, and then once you are mindful of that and avoid it, it does get easier down the road to where all of a sudden you're not even getting upset. You don't have that compulsion to get upset, but to deal with what you're discussing, which might have upset you before, and how freeing that is to be rid of some of these problems.
I've got to be a lot more exhausted and a lot more stressed than I was before to reach my breaking point, and it's because I'm much faster to recognize when I'm just sort of overreacting to something or dealing, feeling anxiety I don't need to feel, that I can let go of.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to mainstream scientists, where do they have a problem with Schwartz's work? Like, what makes it controversial in there? What are some of the criticisms?
It's the most fascinating piece of the criticisms, and if you read the whole piece, there's probably a lot of different things that have driven people crazy about Jeff Schwartz, right? But there's a wonderful anecdote in the story in which he, after his therapy has come out and it's been, I think at this point, the replication had even been published. I mean, this is now solid science. And he was invited by a colleague, I believe it was at Yale, to come and show people in their psychiatry department what he was doing. And so they had a patient come in, a client that they were dealing with, to work with Jeff so they could watch him work with a patient and see, sort of what transpired. And so 2 people were observing him, 2 people on the faculty, and he was dealing with this adolescent kid with a fairly serious case of OCD. And as Jeff explained to him, this isn't you. These thoughts you have to perform these compulsions are not you. They are your malfunctioning brain. He's right there. He is really making a dramatic statement in that stands on its head the way these things are normally thought of scientifically. He's separating this person, right, from their brain, ultimately. And so the kid really apparently vibed with Schwartz, right? Like, he got it. He was into it. He left feeling buoyant. You could just sort of see, and a lot of Jeff's patients apparently go through this. They work with Schwartz and they have an immediate hit of just sort of optimism when this is just even expressed to them, that they don't have to think of this compulsion as really being their true self. So this kid's feeling this, and Schwartz is feeling pretty good about what he's just been able to show them. And one of the faculty members turns to him and says, "Well, it looks like that kid sure was impressed with your shtick."
Uh-huh.
And he's like, "Shtick? What do you mean, shtick?" And, this has been peer reviewed, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, well, it looks like a shtick to me.
Wow.
And so I think, again, to take it back to the idea of paradigm shifting, we're 20 years on from that incident even, or 15 from that specific incident. And so things have shifted a lot. And I don't know that you get exactly the same reaction now that he did then, but that's because he helped produce this shift where now people take mindfulness very, very seriously as an effective therapy.
So I guess it's just kind of this age-old battle of it's working, but we don't understand why. So is it ethical to use it?
Well, I think on one level, I mean, in terms of neuroplasticity, we have some understanding of why, in the sense that, the neurons that fire together wire together. So we get that much. And the other point I'd make about this, and I think that we do kind of resist this as a culture and certainly scientifically at times, but, the Buddhists weren't doing this for 1,000 years as a daily practice because it doesn't work. Right? Because it achieves absolutely no effect whatsoever. Mm-hmm. They were doing it because it works. And, if we don't quite understand all the mechanisms of how, or if it doesn't work in perhaps the way they think it works, or for the reasons they think it works, it's doing something. And, obviously Schwartz's research has shown that.
Mm-hmm. Now, some of his work and some of all of this, at least in the Western world, harkens back from Freud and Jung and some of the classics, and they also kind of use themselves as a model where they examined their own issues, and of course they had their own issues as a big part of their lives. And it appears that Schwartz is a bit similar in that he has his own demons that he faces, and does he use himself as kind of a guinea pig?
Well, he started practicing mindfulness in college, and it's very, very clear to me, and he's very open about the fact that, he's had probably a tough personal and professional life in terms of interpersonal relationships. And there's a lot in the story about that. And one of the cool things to me about Obsessed, and the reason it runs to 14,000 words instead of the originally contracted 4,000, is because it's rare to get a subject in the scientific community who is so open and so willing to let me spend time with him and, just sort of so wanting to be understood, right? I mean, he so wanted to be understood. So we end up getting a glimpse of this guy, a really raw glimpse of this guy. And it's not always appealing. Throughout the book, there's descriptions of various, sort of blow-ups and fights that he's had, and one in which he even sort of, apologized and referred to how he had kind of broken with what was then his Buddhist faith in terms of his behavior, and said that, I'm deeply sorry because, he'd sort of spiritually wounded himself by misbehaving. So Jeff has issues. I'm not entirely sure what they are, completely. I get into that in the book too. There's sort of like the guessing game that goes on about, I'll put it in these terms, like what exactly is wrong with this guy, right? And because you don't meet a lot of people like Jeff. He is an incredibly brilliant powder keg. You know what I mean? I don't know how to else to put it. Both very intelligent and seemingly random at times in terms of his explosions. Disagreement does not sit well with Jeff. Everything that every place that would come up where I wouldn't just sort of nod my head, there's a little bit of it. It's a kind of an affront to him, And so I definitely invite people, read it and then let me know what you think's going on with Jeff. Because he's a really interesting guy, and when you get beyond all that, when you learn that, like, if you deal with this sort of, the kind of the hurricane winds he throws at you at times, there's really peaceful weather behind that, and a very sweet sort of heart. He cares. I mean, I think one of the big reasons he explodes so much is because he cares as much as he does.
I've been following your work for a while now, and interviewed you and written about some of your work before. But it seems like there's a lot of excitement for this project that I haven't seen in the past. You seem more passionate about this book. And what did inspire you? What makes you so passionate about his work?
Oh, really, it does go back to my own experience. We discussed this a little bit before. I mean, I think like a lot of people, there were times when, there are times when we behave as if we don't have free will, right? There are times when we behave automatically. We feel something and we react, right? Or we have a thought and we react, and we go with that sort of that first impulse all the time. And mindfulness better enabled me to behave as the person I want to be rather than the person my impulses push me to be. Mm-hmm. And that is a profoundly different way of living and sort of being in the world. And I think the previous book kind of was leading me on the path to that. That's when I started meditating more. And so I think this means a lot to me because I think it would mean a lot to anybody who takes this on, right? I mean, I think anybody who is not currently, meditating or practicing mindfulness, who takes it on will find a lot of benefit in their lives. And you don't have to do it in a quote, spiritual context. Just doing it has a huge benefit.
Mm-hmm. Like the Buddhists would say, which I always keep in mind, we create a lot of our suffering and we don't have to. We have control over it if we choose to exercise that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think that, up until about 2007, a lot of my life was unnecessary suffering. Mm-hmm. And this story sort of speaks to how you can escape that. And I guess that's why you're picking up on me being maybe more buoyant and enthusiastic. Awesome. I'm more full of buoyancy and enthusiasm. I mean, that's, you know what I mean? Like, I'm more in touch with how I really feel about things as opposed to like these sorts of overlays that were there.
Well, it sounds like his work has helped you.
Yeah, oh, for sure.
So, and I wanted to mention too, along with this book, you have another one that just came out at the same time, simultaneously.
Yeah, about 5 weeks apart from one another, which is, like in publishing terms, that's simultaneously. Yeah. Another e-single called Gosnell's Babies. Couldn't be more different. It's about an abortion provider in Philadelphia, Dr. Kermit Gosnell, who's arrested and convicted of murdering babies born alive during botched abortions. And I'm the only journalist who's had a chance to speak to him since his conviction. And so I wrote an e-single about him and what's going on in his mind.
Great. Sounds pretty interesting. So people can look down there, and I'll put in the description some links to your work and where they can get your books and follow you on your social networking and everything. And thanks again for the interview, and good luck with the books, and keep up with the great work.
Thank you so much for having me, man. I really appreciate it.